The sound came first, an unrelenting scrape against steel that echoed through the quiet corridor. Nurses paused mid-step, glancing at one another as the noise grew sharper, more desperate. At the far end were the polished doors of the old elevator stood closed. A German shepherd pressed his paws flat against the metal, claws raking furrows across its surface. His chest rose and fell in harsh rhythm, each breath fogging the cool surface before vanishing into the pale hospital light. 2. Those who knew him, the dog was no stranger. He belonged to a paramedic who often worked the night shifts, a steady companion at the ambulance bay, where sirens faded into silence and fatigue clung to every face. But tonight he had slipped free of his handler. No one had seen him until now, when his sudden frenzy had turned a sterile hallway into a stage of alarm. The shepherd's eyes burned with urgency, not the wild gleam of fear, but a steady insistence, like something inside the walls called to him, something no human could yet hear. At first, an orderly tried to coax him back, kneeling with a soft whistle, palm extended. The dog ignored him. His ears pinned, nose pressed tight against the seam of the elevator doors, he scratched again, harder. The sound tore through the silence, metal against claw, steady and unrelenting. The hallway lights flickered once, though whether from faulty wiring or the tremor of unease, no one could say. Nurse Elena Vargas was the first to step closer. She was not easily shaken. 10 years in trauma had dulled her reactions to blood, to screams, to the ordinary chaos of survival. Yet something about the animal's fixation unsettled her. She watched the muscles ripple beneath his coat. The tension coiled in every limb. He was not panicked. He was not lost. He was certain. And certainty in a dog often meant danger. She crouched, eyes level with his, and whispered, "What is it, boy?" The shepherd didn't glance at her. He pressed harder, nails catching in the groove of the door as though he might tear it apart with his own strength. Beneath his breath came a low whine, strained and muffled, almost mournful. It was then Elena noticed the silence beyond the door, the absence of the usual groan of machinery, the faint hum of cables. The elevator had not moved in some time. A doctor passing by muttered about animals not belonging inside, already pulling his phone from his pocket to call security. But Elena reached out, touching the shepherd's ruff with hesitant fingers. His body quivered under her hand, and in that tremor she felt something more than agitation. It was urgency layered with dread, as if every second wasted carried weight. The dog turned his head then, just enough for her to glimpse the reflection in his dark eyes, her own face, pale and uncertain, framed by the steel. Then he snapped. Back to the door, barking once, sharp and guttural before resuming the relentless scratch. Elena straightened, her chest tightening. The hallway seemed narrower now, the sterile air heavier. For the first time in years, she felt the old stirrings of fear she had buried beneath routines and protocol. Something waited behind those doors, hidden in silence, and the only witness was a dog who would not be moved. The bark echoed, then faded. The corridor fell still again, except for the scrape of claws against metal. The hospital around them carried on, monitors beeping, distant voices murmuring, but here, at this threshold, time itself seemed to hold its breath, and in that held breath, a question lingered. What had the shepherd found that no one else could see? The scrape of claws against steel filled the corridor, each strike steady as a heartbeat. The German shepherd's body was taut, ears locked forward, his gaze never shifting from the seam of the elevator door. Nurse Elena stood a pace behind him, her breath shallow, uncertain whether to step closer or call someone to pry him away. The hallway lights trembled in their sockets as if stirred by some hidden current, their glow casting long, thin shadows that shifted with the dog's. Restless motion, Elena's thoughts raced. It was late. Most of the hospital had settled into its muted rhythm, the ebb and flow of monitors and hushed conversations. Yet here, outside this unmoving elevator, the quiet felt unnatural, too complete. The air pressed down with weight, and with it came the sharp reminder of moments she had long suppressed, those nights when she had stood between life and death, holding hope against odds she did not believe in. The dog's bark split the silence again, sharper this time, as though he had grown impatient with the hesitation around him. His paws struck harder, leaving faint streaks where the claws dragged over polished metal. From somewhere deep within the shaft came a muffled sound. Indistinct at first, a vibration so subtle Elena wondered if it was her own pulse echoing in. Her ears. She leaned closer, straining to listen. There it was again, a dull thud, followed by another. Then, faintly, a voice. It was hard to tell if it rose from below or above, the words too broken by distance to be clear. Yet the shape of it was unmistakable, human. Elena's throat tightened. She glanced around the hallway. The orderly had already stepped back, frowning, torn between protocol and instinct. The doctor with the phone had disappeared around the corner, perhaps calling for security or maintenance. No one seemed willing to act, yet the shepherd would not stop. His certainty filled the space where human doubt faltered. She pressed the call button. The light flickered once, but nothing moved. No gears shifted, no doors slid open. The elevator remained sealed as if holding its secrets close. The shepherd growled low, a rumble that reverberated through the floor. The faint voice rose again, clearer this time. A cry, short and strained, followed by silence. Elena's skin prickled. Her eyes darted to the ceiling, to the small vent above the doors, as though answers might leak through the slats. Nothing came but the steady hum of fluorescent lights. The dog stopped suddenly, head jerking toward the base of the door. He crouched, nose pressing against the seam at the floor. Then, with a quick, insistent motion, he pawed the linoleum as though trying to dig his way beneath. Elena felt a shiver run down her arms. He was not guessing. He was responding to something real. She turned sharply toward the intercom by the wall. Her fingers hovered above the emergency button, hesitating. Pressing it meant summoning attention, questions, disruption, and she was not certain what she was asking for. But then she remembered the sound. That cry, hollow and fleeting, already swallowed by silence. She pressed. A harsh buzz filled the corridor, followed by the weary voice of the night operator. Elena tried to keep her tone steady, but the words emerged taut, edged with urgency. Elevator near Ward C isn't responding. I think someone's trapped inside. The line crackled, then fell silent as the operator promised to send maintenance. Yet, even as she let her hand drop, Elena knew the minutes would be long. Too long. She looked down at the shepherd, who lifted his head toward her, eyes locking with hers for the first time. There was no mistaking it. In that gaze lived demand, not plea. The sound from within came again, weaker now, a pounding, irregular, as if fading. The dog whined, a sharp, sorrowful note that pierced the stillness. Elena clenched her fists, every instinct pushing against the training that told her to wait, to follow procedure. Somewhere behind those sealed doors, someone was slipping further away, and the only bridge to them was a dog who refused to be ignored. Then came a sound neither she nor the dog could mistake. The faint groan of strained metal deep in the shaft, a warning of something giving way. The corridor froze, every noise stilled, but for the shepherd's growl, low and urgent, vibrating against the silence. And in that held breath, a question lingered. What had the shepherd found that no one else could see? Elena pressed the call button with her thumb and felt nothing give back. No shudder of cables, no answering hum. The metal kept its secrets. The dog, Rook, someone whispered down the hall, the paramedic's shepherd, drove his paws harder into the seam. His nails rasped along the groove, then paused, head cocked, listening to something inside the shaft that only he seemed to hear. A security guard arrived, jacket half-zipped, the ghost of an old limp in his gait. "Back up, please," he said, but even the instruction came softer than protocol, as if the quiet here demanded respect. He reached for the intercom panel and pressed the button. Static. He pressed again, longer. Still nothing. The lights above the door blinked through floors like a memory attempting to remember itself, then steadied on nothing at all. From the windows at the corridor's far end, the day was thinning. Wind worried the line of poplars outside, leaves turning their pale undersides toward a sky that had lost its color. The air conditioning seemed to breathe out and hold. Rook's ears tipped forward. Elena felt the shift before she understood. A faint warmth lifting from the crack, the whisper of air moving the wrong way. She caught it as scent rather than temperature. Hot dust, the iron tang of a machine that had been pushed past what it was made for. "Mechanical will handle it," the guard said, already lifting his phone, already waiting for someone else's decision to arrive. Rook barked once. It wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It had the hard core of urgency that people find hard to ignore because it isn't asking. It's telling. He dropped his muzzle to the lower seam, breathed in and whined. Long. Low. Pulled from somewhere old. Elena knelt. "Talk to me," she murmured, absurd and necessary, a tether for her own rising unease. She pressed her ear to the metal. At first, only the blood in her own head, the distant thrum of the building's systems, then, barely, a sound separate from her, 2 taps, a pause, one more. Not panic. Not random. The shape of intention trying to squeeze through steel. "There's someone in there," she said, and heard how it landed. Too calm to be dismissed, too steady to be hysteria. The guard's eyes shifted. He bent closer and tried the intercom again. Voice formal now, out of habit. "If anyone can hear me, respond by knocking." He let go of the button. The stillness swallowed them. Then, 3 taps, spaced with care. Another, weaker, from farther back. Elena stood. She had been at this long enough to recognize the quiet. Calculations that move behind a human face when the rules of the day break open. In the reflection on the elevator, she watched her own mouth make a straight line. "Call a code gray for elevator entrapment. Now, and get engineering. I want the machine room checked for heat," the guard relayed, voice quickening. Rook, as if satisfied that the message had finally crossed the divide, left the door in a sudden pivot and trotted to the stairwell. He scratched at the painted metal, shot a look back to Elena, then scratched again. He was not confused. He was drawing a line, the way shepherds have always drawn lines across fields and flocks and danger. She followed, taking the stairs as if the air were denser with each step. The guard came behind them, muttering about access and keys, then falling silent when he saw the dog's certainty, a kind of authority not written in any manual. The door to the service level opened on a long corridor of concrete and pipes. The smell met them first. Warm oil, old dust, the faint sweetness that sometimes precedes smoke. Rook lowered his head and pulled as if the air itself had a leash on him. The machine room was behind a locked grate. The guard fumbled the ring. On his belt, hands not as steady as he would have liked them to be. Elena watched Rook watch the door. The way his body stilled, as dogs do when stillness is the final syllable before action. The lock gave, and the room breathed out heat. Not flame, yet, but the kind of radiant warning that sends living things backward. Panels blinked in uneven rhythms. A single red LED pulsed at the far wall, dull and exhausted-looking. The motor casing low on the right thrummed in an off-key way, a vibration that seemed to travel through bone. Elena felt the hair on her arms rise without wind. "Shut it down," she said. "We're not certified." "Shut it down," she repeated, and heard in her own voice the edges of an older night, a stretcher too late by minutes, the ache that had followed her home and saturated her sleep for a season. The guard swallowed and reached for the emergency stop. The hum flattened. The room exhaled a silence that was not relief. On the wall, a sheet of laminated protocol yellowed at the corners. Elena scanned it with the quick literacy of someone who learned rules only to know when to break them. Manual door release, floor landing, 2, if the car is within range. She turned to Rook. Show me then. He was already moving, back to the stairwell, up one flight, pause, careful on concrete. At the second-floor landing, the corridor had grown darker. The storm wind outside tested the glass with small, cool taps like waiting fingers. Elena crouched to the hall door nearest the shaft and felt the wall. Warm, then warmer. Not burning, but rising. A nurse from respiratory arrived, breathless, a toolbox awkward in his hands. Engineering stuck on a generator issue, he said. They said, "We're here," Elena answered. "We're it." The access panel yielded to the nurse's screwdriver. Behind it, the old mechanics of a younger building. A wheel, a lever meant to be pulled by someone who trusted force married to caution. Elena looked to the guard, who had always walked with that slight drag of an old injury. He set his jaw and took the lever. "On 3, he said, because rituals matter when certainty doesn't. 1, 2. A cough drifted from the shaft. Not loud. A child's shape of sound transported through cable and air. Then another, layered with an adult's instruction held to a whisper. Stay low. Hold hands. Rook went still as stone. The scraping, his scraping, had stopped. His eyes, fixed on the seam as if he could will it to open with attention alone. Elena heard something in herself answer. A small private vow that lives under uniforms and training and lives longer than policy. 3, the guard said. They pulled. Metal protested, then yielded a grudging inch. Hot air slipped through and brushed their faces with the taste of singed insulation. The nurse slid the wheel, and the doors parted enough for a sliver of black. From within, it came the clicking of an oxygen tank being adjusted, the soft restraint of someone calming someone else, and, threaded faintly through the heat, the steadying cadence of a woman counting, 1 to 5, back again, like a metronome. Against panic. "How many?" Elena called, mouth near the gap. Silence gathered, then a voice answered from the dark. "More than you think." Somewhere far below, the building's power hiccuped, and the corridor lights stuttered, then steadied into a thinner glow. Wind pressed against the windows. Rook's ears pricked, then flattened as if hearing a change still out of human reach. Elena felt the lever tremble in her grip, the shaft's vast throat answering in a way that did not feel like an empty room, but like a held breath about to release. A new sound rose from the depths, faint at first, then undeniable. The slow, unwelcome crackle of insulation giving up its smoke to air that did not have room for it. The scrape of claws against steel echoed like a metronome for fear. Elena stood rooted, her palm still pressed to the shepherd's tense shoulder. The dog's body had gone rigid, ears pricked forward as though he could hear something buried in the silence no human ear could catch. The faint tremor of the hospitals. Fluorescent lights flickered again, and in that shiver of brightness, her own reflection on the elevator doors seemed strangely fragile, like glass waiting to crack. The doctor who had muttered about security was already gone, his footsteps fading, down the corridor, but Elena stayed. She had seen enough in her years to know when something did not align, when instinct, the kind sharpened not by logic but by survival, demanded attention. And now that instinct was standing on 4 legs, fur bristling, eyes fixed on the place. No one else dared to look. A sound followed. Barely there. A muffled thud from beyond the sealed doors. Elena's throat tightened. The shepherd's ears twitched sharply and he pressed closer, claws rasping against the seam until a tiny fleck of paint flaked loose. His low whine deepened into a guttural growl, not of aggression, but of certainty. Something was alive behind. That barrier. Elena's hand dropped away. She felt her pulse rise in her wrists, steady but forceful, as if her own body was preparing for an unspoken choice. The elevator panel on the wall blinked, red digits frozen between floors. She knew enough about the building's age to sense what that meant. The car had stopped mid-descent, and if anyone was inside, the thought curdled before she could finish it. From the opposite end of the hall, another figure appeared, Samuel Ortiz, the hospital's maintenance technician. His shoulders carried the sag of exhaustion, but his face sharpened when he saw the dog clawing at the elevator. "What's this about?" he asked, voice low, eyes darting to Elena. "He hears something," Elena replied, though her own certainty wavered as she said it aloud. "No, he knows something." Samuel frowned but crouched, listening. For a moment there was only the buzz of lights and the faint hiss of ventilation. Then, another sound. A hollow knock, irregular but unmistakable. Not mechanical, human. The shepherd barked once, sharp and decisive. Samuel stood abruptly, his jaw set. If the car's stuck with people inside... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The silence filled in the rest. The air shifted in the hallway. A draft slipped through, carrying with it the scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint metallic tang of old wiring. Elena noticed the way the dog's breathing changed. Faster, heavier, yet steadier, as though he was shouldering the weight of urgency no one else could carry. For the first time, she wondered not only what was trapped inside, but why this animal seemed tethered to it, as though saving strangers was written into his marrow. Samuel pulled out his keys, fumbling through the ring with hands that trembled, more than he wanted to admit. "We'll have to override it," he muttered. The shepherd sat abruptly, tail rigid, gaze unbroken from the steel. It was as if he understood that the next movement mattered. Elena leaned closer to the doors, pressing, her ear against the seam. From deep within, faint voices rose, a chorus of fear blurred by distance. One voice, high and cracked, called out, then another, desperate and muffled. She closed her eyes, and for a moment the sound transported her to memories she had long buried. Nights in trauma wards when families screamed names that never received an answer. Her chest ached. She would not let that echo repeat here. She stepped back. "Do it," she told Samuel, her voice calm though her palms burned with sweat. The shepherd rose again, claws flexing against the floor, his tail brushing lightly against her leg as though anchoring her resolve. His body was no longer frantic but poised, as if he, too, was waiting for the final breach. Samuel slid a key into the panel. The lock clicked, releasing with a sound too loud in the silence. The doors shuddered but did not open. He swore under. His breath turning the key again, muscles in his forearm taut. Another shudder, heavier this time. The shepherd growled low, stepping back as if bracing for what might emerge. Then came a sound that stilled all three of them. A scream from inside, faint but piercing enough to slice through steel and air alike. The corridor fell silent again. Elena felt the breath catch in her throat, and beside her the shepherd's body stiffened, eyes burning toward the door as though they alone could tear it open. Somewhere between the hum of the lights and the stillness of their pause, a truth settled. They were no longer guessing. The danger was real, and the next move would decide who lived through the night. The scream inside the elevator cut off as suddenly as it began, leaving a silence that pressed against every wall. Samuel forced the key hard into the panel, twisting until the mechanism groaned, and with one final shudder, the doors slid apart. Heat spilled out, stale and suffocating. Within the dim car, 12 faces turned toward the crack of light. Their clothes clung with sweat, their voices hoarse from shouting. A child clutched. Her mother's arm, an old man sagged against the rail, his lips moving in prayer. Relief came not with cheers, but with a heavy, trembling quiet. The silence of people who had been too close to the edge. The shepherd lunged forward, planting himself at the threshold, nose lifted as though counting every life inside. One by one. The trapped souls were guided out, steadied by Elena's hand, Samuel's arm, the firm reassurance of presence. No one spoke thanks immediately. The weight of breath, the shuffle of feet on the tile, was enough. When the last passenger stepped free, the dog sat back, chest rising in slow rhythm, gaze steady on Elena. His coat was streaked with flakes of paint from the door, claws worn to raw edges. She reached for him, fingers brushing through his fur, not with gratitude alone, but with recognition. He had heard what no one else could. He had carried their fear before they even knew it themselves. The corridor was still again, save for the faint hum of lights and the shuffle of recovering steps. Outside, dusk pressed gently against the hospital windows, sky washed in muted gold and fading gray. The shepherd lowered himself to the floor, curling as though the weight of vigilance had finally lifted. His eyes closed not in exhaustion, but in release. Elena stood with her hand on his back, watching the rescued group disappear into waiting arms. No words were needed. The truth lay in the quiet space between breaths, that survival had hinged on instinct, loyalty, and a voice carried through claws against steel. Long after the hall had emptied, the dog's paw print remained smudged across the elevator door. A mark not of desperation, but of warning answered.